for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah, how you doing? Today's Tuesday, September 24th, 2019. $268 days into the new year, just 97 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I am your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? How you doing? All right. Yeah, I just opened it up live on the air. This is Sean Patrick's new album. Nice note here. Thank you, Sean. And, be rocking this tomorrow. I went through a Sean Patrick phase a couple of years ago. We became friends, and I listened to his stuff for like a week straight, and I cannot wait. Once More Hate Me, the new CD. Be rocking this tomorrow. Thank you so much, Sean. And I know you're probably listening right now. Pop something up on Twitter and go, dude, right on. Right on, right on. Okay. Big night tonight. Nick Redfern is here. We're going to talk about his two latest books, The Alien Book, A Guide to Extraterrestrial Beings on Earth, and Flying Saucers from the Kremlin. I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black, Nick Redfern. Nick, good evening. How are you?
Hey, Jimmy. I'm good, thanks. How's it going?
I just want to know what rock and roll shirt you have on right now.
You must have ESP. I've actually got one on. I've got a Motorhead out of Ace of Spades.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. Have you been to the Have you been to the Rainbow in Hollywood?
I have, but it's been at least 8-9 years ago, something like that.
Oh, well, they have put up. You need to go again this year. We had our company party there last year. We booked the whole club, by the way. Can you imagine that? A Fade to Black Christmas party at the Rainbow. And we're going to do it again this year. You should come out because they have a Lemmy statue there.
Yeah, I've seen that actually. Funnily enough, I've got a really cool photo of the statue with the late, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and who passed away just recently.
Yes.
I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago. She sent me a picture of her actually standing next to the Lemmy statue, which was really cool.
Well, I want to take a picture of you standing next to the Lemmy statue.
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, do it. Let's do it. The invitation is official. So,
all right.
I gotta fix my chair. My chair keeps shrinking. You know what? We're going to start off here a little bit strange tonight. Before the show, not before the show, before you came on, I listed, somebody asked me for my favorite, my top 10 list of UFO, ET, science fiction, space films, right? Okay, my top 10 list. And I couldn't put 10 together. I got 30 together. But before I get back to that, a debate started here on Twitter a few minutes ago because I listed my number one film as 2001: A Space Odyssey, and which I think qualifies as science fiction. It could even qualify as Alien or ET. But somebody tweeted, Mark out there in Australia said 2001 doesn't have aliens in it. I'm like, it doesn't? So wait a minute here. That's what the film is about. I'm going to throw that over to you, Nick. Is 2001: A Space Odyssey a film about contact with ET?
Well, I would guess so. I mean, ironically, for all the writing I do, I'm not a big fan of sci-fi, really. I love horror movies. But as far as 2001's concerned, I mean, I thought that, the beginning of the movie, the whole point is there's like this extraterrestrial monolith appears and sort of gives the primitive apes some sort of advanced intelligence, to allow for us to finally kind of start to create civilization, So
that's it.
I mean,
Nick,
I don't know what he's talking about.
Nick Redfern has spoken. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Now, when and I just want to throw this out there at you. We were talking about this earlier today. I've seen what appears to be a pretty massive DVD, CD collection in your home. And
that's CDs, yeah.
Yeah, it's an entire wall. But you're a media guy. When you think of ET, alien type films, and you're a writer, this is what you do, right? You're a journalist. What would be the number one film about aliens or ET for you?
Oh, wow. You really put me on the spot now.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you one that I did like, and I don't think it was actually a massive movie, was They Live, John Carpenter's movie, which was kind of like a satire on present-day society, where you could only see the aliens if you're wearing these special sunglasses. Do you remember that one?
That came in at that's my number 8. Absolutely. Oh, wow. I think, you know what, though, Nick? I think it's a documentary myself.
Yeah, there you go.
I think it's spot on the money. I love it. The soundtrack, right? The bass guitar. Doom, doom, doom. Right? That's it. So cool.
It's like all the way through. Almost.
All the way through the whole movie. I hope that guy got a good royalty check, whoever played that bass part. But yeah, I'm with you on that. They Live is Roddy Piper, man. It's just an incredible movie. Incredible. So I'm with you on that. My number 3, 2, and 1. My number 3 was Mars Attacks. And comedy, but I really enjoyed it. And my number 2 was Forbidden Planet. And just an incredible film. So there you go. All right, so let's. Go ahead.
I'd have to say that probably right near the top of mine would be the original Planet of the Apes. I like that one.
Oh, see, I forgot that. And you know what else? You know what else I forgot on my list? There's so many great films, right? But I started thinking about this after I was done. Silent Running. Remember that with Bruce Dern from 1972?
I do, but I don't think I've actually seen it since I was a kid. I honestly don't really remember it much.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. A great movie, though. A great movie. I think the soundtrack, the hit song from that, probably won an Oscar. It's Got to Be the Morning After. Was the song from that. I can't remember who sang that, but it was a number one hit. Somebody will pop it up here on Twitter shortly. Now, let's kind of get straight to it. Before we get to the books, I want to talk about the craziness that has been the last couple of months in the UFO community, all the way through to from the Navy saying that unidentified aerial phenomena is what is in these 3 videos that were released this year. That was huge news for anybody that's in the UFO community, to have the government step forward. They didn't say UFOs, but they did say UAPs. That was big. And then this craziness that was the Storm Area 51 event out there at Area 51 with 3 million people signed up, but nobody showed up for it. But it was all over the media, right? What do you think about UFOs in the last couple of months in popular culture? Pretty exciting?
Well, I mean, in terms of the whole Area 51 thing, I don't know if my views might be quite different to a lot of other people, but I'll tell you what they are. I mean, from my perspective, you can find a lot of information on Area 51, on the internet, in books, etc. You can track down old-timers who worked there and spoke to them and, get a good picture of what was going on and what possibly is still going on. But I have to say that personally, I think encouraging people to storm U.S. military bases is not the way to go. My view is that, if somebody said, well, let's get something together where 1 million people will try and storm the Pentagon, people would be outraged, and quite rightly, if somebody said they wanted to do that and let's get it going. And I kind of view it just like that. I mean, just because Area 51 has this sort of cool, mysterious UFO angle to it, I don't believe at all that anyone should be trying to get people all enthused to storm a U.S. military installation. I mean, that's just asking for major trouble,
I know. And let's suppose, and I totally agree, you're spot on. Let's suppose 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people, did show up and attempted, to storm those gates. Do you think that the Air Force, the military police would have shot at American citizens inside of our nation's borders?
Well, I mean, I don't know it's hard to say, but I mean, one of the things I would say when you said, about shooting American citizens, I mean, I think probably one of the legitimate concerns that the government would have had is that, well, what if some of the people in that huge crowd were actually inserted from foreign nations or whatever? That might sound a bit paranoid, but it's not over the top or impossible that there could have been, people from some other nation seeded in, playing the role of ufologists. I mean, that's something, interesting and disturbing to think about. But I mean, I just don't know what the response would be. But I mean, what I can say is that, I mean, if you go out to Area 51 and you get just about as far as you can, before the guards come along and turn you around, I mean, it makes it very clear that they have, that they have the right to use deadly force. And, for the most part, I'm sure they're thinking of 1 or 2 people at a time. If, figures in, say, 5,000-10,000 of people really did try and storm the base, I mean, I shudder to think what the response would have been. But all I can say for sure is that, they have the right to shoot to kill. So.
Yeah. Well, if you and I were out there, you in a Misfits shirt, me in a Van Halen shirt, that has a bad ending, right? I mean, I just, and I've teased about it over the years, way before this Storm Area 51 thing, and I used to joke with Rita, I would like to go out there and get arrested and take one for the team and see how far I could get inside, that they wouldn't do anything. But, I say that kind of stuff in jest. I'm just joking around. The signs are clearly posted. I have one right here in the studio, right? From Area 51. All right, I'll hold it up to the camera. and it says use of deadly force, right there. I mean, so they've done their part. They've warned you. And if you're, if you're not smart enough to read and you walk past this sign, well, it's on you. It's on you.
Yeah. But I think the other angle, which is almost more like a pop culture angle, is that, Area 51, you don't have to be involved in ufology to know what Area 51 is. I mean, you could ask somebody, the guy down the street, who might have no interest in UFOs whatsoever, knows nothing about this subject, but if you were to say to him, what's Area 51? He would say, oh, that's that place out in the desert where the UFOs are. Everybody knows about it. So, in other words, certainly in the last year or two, Area 51 has become part of, like a piece of Americana almost. It's become a little bit of not just American history, but like pop culture itself, quite literally. And I find that intriguing that aspects of the UFO phenomenon are now kind of seeping into the regular world outside of ufology. And I think that's also the case, with the whole issue when you brought up about the Navy. I mean, we were told up until at least late 2017 when the story broke about ATIP and, the secret investigations into UFOs, which appeared in the New York Times. Up until that point, we've been told that UFO research had been shut down in 1969 when Project Blue Book was cancelled. And the debunkers and the skeptics said, see, they're not doing any research, there's no more projects or programs or operations going on. And then we suddenly found, late 2017, there actually was a highly classified program which was doing all sorts of extraordinary research. And so this is another example, kind of similar to the Area 51 thing, where the media, the press, and the public sat up and took notice of this sudden revelation that, yes, there is an ongoing UFO program. So what I'm finding is something like really interesting is ufology is being expanded by, in a very strange way, by the Navy. The Navy are bringing attention to this phenomena, and more people outside of our field are listening and watching. So, it demonstrates that there's things are going on that I think we're not seeing the full picture. I think what we're getting when the Navy, and ATIP and all these revelations are coming out. Now, I'm not saying it's full-blown disclosure, but I think at least I just have a vibe, a feeling that this particular group, and possibly other groups as well that are investigating the subject, are not just putting this information out because they feel it's in the public's interest, but I think they're also addressing and trying to gauge how the public is responding to all this and how the media is responding. And maybe, that does have a bearing on disclosure. The idea of, well, let's put a little bit more out for them to see and a little bit more and see how the public listens and sees and what they think about it. So I think there's an agenda that goes beyond just investigating UFOs. I think part of it is to figure out how everybody's thinking about it,
Well, okay. I don't say this in jest. I say this because this is who you are. You are somebody that would wear a DRI or a Misfits shirt, right? That you are part of a culture that is anti-establishment and certainly doesn't trust the man, right? That's it. In your opinion, are you saying that we should trust the man right now, the Navy and the Pentagon, to a certain degree? Or, I want to be really clear here.
Well, my view actually is that someone on the inside, or an agency or a think tank or a group inside government or the intelligence community, I was never really a big supporter of disclosure. I'll just paraphrase this first, because I got sick and tired of hearing certain people into the disclosure movement saying, I've been told by a high-ranking source the disclosure's coming next month or 3 months down the line, or I've been told it's coming, 9 months from now, or, it's coming at 3:30 next Thursday afternoon, that kind of thing,
Right,
and I got sick and tired of the whole kind of the boy who cried wolf scenario. He cries too many times and the wolf doesn't, nobody comes and then the wolf kills him. But now, I won't say my views have changed on disclosure, but what I would say is that I do think now, or at least I suspect, that there is a genuine group within government, or think tank, like I said, whatever, that is assessing how the public are themselves assessing all this and how much information should be put out. And so I think what we're seeing is like a very much a psychological-based operation to try and see where this can all lead. And I think possibly there is a good possibility that somebody might be thinking about revealing something really powerful. Or it may just be designed to, sort of make it all our hopes and, yearnings collapse. It could go the other way. But I don't think it's just about UFO research. I think a lot of it has like a sociological kind of aspect to it as well.
Do you, with all of your presentations, you've been a part of the UFO community for a very long time. With your interactions and your knowledge, do you think that there may be some misinfo or disinfo that is going on from inside of the UFO community, and that what is going on right now, the psychological test, may be a part of it?
Well, yeah, I think within the UFO community, we're always, in a position where somebody might feed us something, disinformation, lies, twisted stories, to push us down a different path. That's gone on since 1947,
Sure.
So it wouldn't surprise me if there is something like that going along, in terms of stories that may not be true, rumors that may not be true, and, we're forced to try and figure out, where the truth and the misinformation kind of pass and blend together, possibly even. And I think very often people in ufology are sometimes guilty of just seeing it as black and white, that, yes, the government's investigating UFOs, and we now know that they're doing it. But the more you look into it, there are a lot of other aspects to it as well. And I think very often the weirder, more manipulative side of the subject is very often overlooked, or people don't necessarily even understand what it is. So, yeah, I think everything that's going on right now in ufology is sort of shrouded in uncertainty, whether it's the Area 51 thing, which was like unheard of, this young guy just, posted this thing, and then everybody wants to storm the base, and then we've got like ATIP, all these amazing revelations and footage, and we're in an era of ufology which we've never really seen it like this before, I don't think.
It's been a pretty fun ride this last couple of years, and the reason why I take that position is that because all of us, yourself included, have been chasing the UFO question for a very long time and trying to get to answers. And it was always just over, like you said, right? 3 months, 6 months, 3 months, next year, but it's coming. We're close. And then all of the sudden, this last couple of years, it's been very, very easy to sit back and go, okay. It's like a relief that this time around, Nick, it's nearly tangible. right? I think we can all feel some movement going forward. Do you feel the same thing I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. I think all that we're seeing now is going ahead with a purpose, and there's going to be, a final point of what's going down, But the big question is, well, what is the sort of the modus operandi? What is the ultimate goal? Is it to confuse us even more? Is it to give us disclosure? Or is it to possibly even, this might sound a little bit paranoid, but, if there's some sort of rogue organization that may want to stage UFO events, possibly as a means to sort of create more and more fear in the world. The idea of a bogus, a faked alien event, that kind of thing. Another way to take away a few of our rights, etc.
Well, anything is possible, right? One thing I have learned, I will never be surprised when it comes to the UFO question. Anything is possible. And I don't know how it is going to continue to play out, but I also know that the United States isn't the only player here. This is a global thing. There are plenty of state actors here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about your new book, Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, because you bring up a couple of points in this book that even for me, with an open mind, didn't consider. And I had to step back and go, Nick may be onto something here. And it's not the first time that you've done this to me, by the way. It's not the first time. I remember 5 years ago, you were, I was hosting a panel, you were on it, and I turned to the crowd. When I introduced you, I don't know if you remember this, but when I introduced you, I made a confession, and I said, Nick is where I get all of my new stuff from, right? I go, and I read Nick's stuff, and I've got things to talk about. And do you remember that moment when I said that?
Was that when we were at Contact in the Desert?
It may have been, yes.
Yeah, I remember, because I remember it was roasting, and people were dropping like flies in the audience, left, right, and centre. It was like, jeez. But yeah, I do remember that actually.
And you did it once again in this book, and we will talk about it when we come back after this short break. Our guest tonight, Nick Redfern. I am your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Now you can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Nick, what's your Twitter?
Nick Redfern UFO.
Nick Redfern UFO. I just wanted to hear you say it. We've got it up there on Twitter right now. We'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Nick Redfern. His two latest books, The Alien Book, A Guide to Extraterrestrial Beings on Earth, and Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, are the subject of this show tonight. We're going to start with Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, and I was actually thinking about flipping it around, and starting with the Alien Book. But we're going to start with the Kremlin. And the reason for that, Nick, is after reading the book, I thought that we had crazy town here in the United States when it came to the UFO question, right? I really did. And it seems, I want you to start with your opinion and why you chose to write this book, because they've got the same issues, if not more, than what goes on here with UFO research in the United States, right?
Well, yeah, the book, it's probably the most, or one of the most controversial books I've written. And basically, it's a study of how throughout the entire Cold War, the Russians tried to use the UFO subject as a means of psychological warfare, and to sort of create hysteria and paranoia in the United States. And, of course, the big question is, what prompted this, and how did they decide to sort of hijack, if you like, a real phenomenon, the genuine UFO phenomenon, which we know exists. But the Russians hijacked, if you like, the phenomenon and used it as sort of a tool of psychological warfare and destabilization. I'll give you a sort of classic example of what I mean by this. One of the earliest things I talk about in the book is the saga of George Adamski. Now, Adamski, as you know, was one of the early so-called contactees. We hear a lot about the abductees today, but back in the early 50s, it was the contactees, people who claimed that they'd been contacted by very human-looking aliens out in desert locations like Utah, New Mexico, California, and so on. And typically, these people who were sort of targeted by the aliens were told, you're going to be sort of one of our disciples almost, if you like, and we want you to go out and spread the word that, the Earth needs to lay down its atomic weapons and everybody needs to live in peace. Now, George Adamski sort of really embraced that scenario and wrote a book called Flying Saucers. What was it called now? Flying Saucers Have Landed. And Adamski, his book, co-written with a colleague, basically the sales went through the roof. In no time at all, it sold 125,000 copies. Now, at the time when he was lecturing about his book, Adamski was telling the audience that the Space Brothers, which was the title for these very human-looking aliens, the Space Brothers, according to Adamski, were communists, or they had a government very similar to communism. And he also spoke on the lecture circuit quite visibly and openly, saying that the Russians would basically defeat the West, and then there'd be, to quote from him, 1,000 years of peace. A lot of people don't realize how strongly Adamski bought into communism. And now the FBI got very interested and very concerned about Adamski's lectures and how he was putting this communist slant on it. And what the FBI did was to open a file on him. And just to give you an idea of how deeply and widely the FBI kept an eye on Adamski, not too long ago, they finally released every single page they have on Adamski, surveillance files. And it turned out it was just over 400 pages of FBI surveillance documents on Adamski. That demonstrates just how much they watched him. Now, if Adamski had just been lecturing, so shall we say, on a Sunday afternoon in a local library, and there was 5 people and somebody's dog and cat in the audience, the FBI wouldn't have bothered. They wouldn't have cared. But the fact that this man was selling his book in 125,000 copies and was saying that communism was good, the aliens are communist, the FBI came around to the suspicion that Adamski had been sort of recruited to, in effect, spread communism in the United States, but to do it under the banner of the UFO subject.
Ouch. Ouch, especially back then. Oh, right? And it wasn't just one specific thing with Adamski either. He was popular in Europe. He allegedly, didn't he meet the Pope, right? Or he says he did.
Well, yeah. Allegedly, he met the Pope, and he made a lot of sort of grand claims and things like this. But the important thing to note, was that how influential the whole Space Brother contactee movement was at that time. I mean, I'll give you a good example in case, for the listeners who may not know. I mean, you probably agree with me that most UFO conferences, you get an audience usually about 400 to 500, something like that. Mm-hmm. Well, back in the early 1950s, one of the other contactees, George Van Tassel, put on a regular UFO conference out in the California desert just outside the town of Landers. And at its height, that conference was getting audiences of around about 11 to 12,000 people.
That's right.
Which is So that was the FBI's big concern, that because Adamski and some of these other contactees were subtly, and sometimes far less than subtly, trying to play the communist card, so to speak. That's why the FBI got so concerned that they were wondering, well, is he legitimate about saying he's met aliens, or is he just trying to reel people into his conferences and lectures and then subtly start talking about communism, and by the end of the lecture, a significant percentage of the audience might be thinking, wow, maybe communism isn't so bad after all. That's what the FBI's big fear was. And as the years progressed, the FBI and other intelligence agencies in the US had to deal with more and more of this sort of created or expanded upon Russian propaganda.
Did you find a direct connection between Adamski and the Kremlin?
Well, what I did find is that in one of the documents, the official documents, it talks about one of the primary reasons why Adamski was watched was because on one occasion he was seen talking in a cafe, or outside of a cafe, I should say, with 4 or 5 people who are actually speaking to him in Russian, which is like a really bizarre and sort of eye-opening scenario. Following Adamski in downtown Los Angeles and finding out that he actually really did have connections.
Did he speak Russian? Did he speak Russian?
Well, not as far as I know, but he spoke fluent Polish.
Yeah, he's
that's
Polish.
Where he was from.
Right.
Yeah. So we don't know. The problem is, we don't know the full story, and I don't think the FBI ever really fully resolved it all to their satisfaction. But that was really one of the primary sort of psychological warfare, counterintelligence operations that the Russians fired against the United States, if you like, as a means, like another means to sort of try and find ways to make people, if you like, be open at least to the idea of communism.
And Roswell, Annie Jacobson pointed out in her book, Secrets of Area 51, I think that's what it was called, that Roswell may have been an aircraft from either Russia or a Nazi experimental craft that not craft but plane, and that Russia got their hands on it, and that's what crashed in Roswell to scare the crap out of us and use the UFO side of things against us. Any truth to that?
Well, this is a really controversial story. As you said, it surfaced in Annie Jacobson's 2011 book on Area 51. And it tells a very controversial story, which came from a guy named Alfred O'Donnell, who actually spent time in the intelligence community and spent time working at Area 51. And the claim that he made to Annie Jacobson was that the Roswell crash didn't involve aliens, but revolved around an advanced aircraft built and flown as a result of research undertaken by the Nazis in the Second World War, which supposedly the Soviet premier Joseph Stalin got his hands on. And the story is that the plan was to have this futuristic-looking aircraft fly from Russia to the United States and land, and because it would look so futuristic, people would think it was a spacecraft from another world. And just to expand the story even further, supposedly Stalin scientists, and again allegedly, genetically altered or physically altered a number of children to make them look alien-like, if you like. And so that when the craft landed and the doors opened, the people would see this strange craft and these bizarre-looking children who they would assume were children's. Now, from my perspective, I find all of this a little bit too created, if you like, too much staged in terms of exactly what was going down. And there are so many aspects to this particular story that don't hold up that lets me to believe that Annie Jacobson was fed this story deliberately. Now, if you read her book, it's actually a very, very good book.
It's a great
huge book.
Yep.
And it's filled with all sorts of, really interesting information on Area 51. But what I think happened is that when her book came out, and this is just my opinion or my suspicion, what I think is that when the book came out, there were people on the inside who said, look, this is a bit too close, to what we don't want getting out there. So I think she may have been fed this Roswell story, this Russian Roswell story, as a means to essentially sensationalize the book and keep the story of Roswell in the media's mind, while the real good material was not picked up on by the media. And for the most part, that's what happened. Most of the media, or a lot of the media that interviewed Annie Jacobson for her book, a lot of it, did revolve around the Roswell story that was in her book. So I sometimes wonder that the whole Roswell thing may have been given to her and inserted as a means to avoid the media focusing too much on the really good material.
She stands by the ending in the book, though. She does. I had her on the show again. She's been on many times. I had her on last month, and that question came up again because of what's going down at Area 51 right now. And that came up, and she said, I stand by it. I stand by what I wrote. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's no doubt that she was given this story, by this elderly guy who worked in the intelligence community. I don't dispute that at all. But
right.
Whereas Annie, is inclined, I think, to think that it's the real answer to Roswell, I think it was a bogus story designed to ensure that Annie's book was, when the media came along, they would focus on the Roswell story, and the real Area 51 secrets would be sort of glossed over by the media.
Now, let's go straight at it. There's a chapter in the book, maybe a little more than that, about the MJ-12 documents. And before we get into that, because I can see us talking about this for quite a while, the MJ-12 documents, for me, except for maybe one page of all of it, I think they were fictitious. Okay, that's my take. But it had such an impact on the UFO community. There are still, we're talking about it now, right? Still spoken about today. It was a huge story in the UFO community. When that broke, I mean, it was like every single day, right? You remember that? Every day there was some other piece of the pie, and it was fun. That was a good ride. But today I look back and go, well, okay, it was interesting, it was fun, it was cool, but it was bogus. I don't know, and I don't think anybody else does to this day, with a concrete fashion, know who, what, when, and where created the MJ-12 documents. That's where we are at. And once again, you put something out there that I never considered. I never did. So let's actually start there. You've got me thinking again, Nick.
Okay. Well, basically, for people who may not be fully familiar with MJ-12 or Majestic 12, it was essentially, allegedly, a group established in the wake of the Roswell crash in the summer of 1947 to create this super-secret organization called Majestic 12 that would be deeply buried within the heart of the U.S. intelligence community. And its goal would be to hide the real sensational UFO data, Roswell, alien bodies, alien autopsies, that kind of thing. And the story sort of began in the early 1980s when Bill Moore, who co-wrote with Charles Berlitz the book The Roswell Incident, the more that Moore looked into this, he started to be contacted by sort of whistleblowers, insiders, who would hand over to him what was perceived to be, at least, highly classified documents on this Majestic 12 group and the work they were doing in relation to Roswell and crashed UFOs and the whole thing. Now, the whole thing really came to a head in December 1984 when a colleague and friend of Moore named Jamie Chandray received a reel of film that showed a number of these documents, and they printed them off, and that's when the whole thing really kicked off. And Stan Friedman became without doubt, the foremost expert and also champion of the MJ12 documents. Stan, to his dying day, believed that these MJ12 documents were real documents, and there was a genuine Majestic 12 group as well. Now, I kind of have a very different approach to this, which veers away from the angle of real dead aliens and real crashed UFOs, but again to something that a lot of people may not think about, but which, again, had a deep effect, if you like, on U.S. intelligence. And interestingly enough, particularly not just the Air Force, but also the FBI again, who were heavily involved with Adamski. Now, the FBI looked at various theories as to what the MJ12 documents were, because if they were the real thing, then someone had leaked highly classified U.S. government documents, so it was almost like, perceived almost like an earlier Edward Snowden type situation, somebody leaking out highly classified material. But over time, the FBI came to believe that the documents were not real, but they also didn't believe it was just like some guy in his basement just fabricating them for the fun of it. What the FBI believed was that the documents were or suspected, I should say, they suspected that the documents may have been created by the KGB in Russia. And the reason being, and I managed to get some official documentation on this, in the same time that Bill Moore and Stan were looking into the MJ12 documents, the FBI was very concerned because there were a number of people working in the U.S. intelligence aerospace angle, and the FBI was concerned that some of these people had either been turned by the Russians or were in the process of being turned by the Russians. And the FBI's concern was that let's say, for example, you've got John Smith working at one particular classified aircraft program, and he's suddenly approached by a guy named Ivan who says, if you tell us all about this new aircraft program you're working on, we'll give you some classified U.S. government files on UFOs, which we've managed to get our hands on in the Kremlin, and you share what you've got, and we'll share what you've got. And the FBI was also concerned that some of these UFO researchers who worked in the intelligence community would not be able to avoid the lure, so to speak, the dangling carrot. And so the FBI started to keep a look on a lot of people who worked in the intelligence community and who had a personal interest in UFOs. And even more and more then, they came around to the idea that the Russians had created the MJ12 documents, as I said, like as a dangling carrot, and saying, you give us something, we'll give you something. And the fear of the FBI was that the Russians would get some really good legitimate stuff from the people in America who they turned, whereas in return they just get these bogus MJ12 documents. And so, again, we're seeing a picture of MJ12 that largely has not been shown or demonstrated before. Everybody has either said these documents are bogus, they're just hoaxes by, some guy who's got nothing else to do with his time, or they're the real thing. Nobody up until now has really given much thought to the idea that the Russians, the KGB, actually created these documents as a means to secure highly classified material from U.S. intelligence.
Where would and we'll pick this up right after the break, but the intricacies of the MJ-12 documents, the research that was put in behind them, the names, the places, the dates, that's a pretty difficult thing, I've always thought, to put together, but I do believe that they're fake, they're hoax documents. But it had to have come from somebody in the know. So would a state actor like Moscow have all of the information to make sure that their ducks are in a row so that the documents aren't blown out immediately as being bogus because of a bunch of general mistakes? Does Russia have that kind of knowledge on the dates and places and names of the infrastructure here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about that at all. It's like, for example, a slightly different subject, but the Russians have spy satellites circling the globe 24/7. They know exactly where our missile silos are, our nuclear missiles, and vice versa. We know where all of theirs are. And the reason we know is because if those silos are ever opened, and somebody decides to launch, all of those satellites can actually detect the heat sensor as the missiles are getting primed for liftoff.
Right.
That's why one of the good reasons why we haven't had a nuclear war, because both sides know exactly when the other side is getting ready to launch. So that's what why we're still here and we're not sort of fried. So both sides have intricate and deep data on what the other side is doing. But sometimes the reality is actually a fictional and a created reality, and I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of these sort of Russian operations, creating bizarre hoaxed issues and phenomena as a means to gain something in return. And in most of these cases I talk about in the book, the gain in return was intelligence data from people who just could not, walk away and had to sort of hand something over just so they could get, these MJ-12 documents in return.
It's certainly an interesting twist in all of this, Nick, and we'll continue this when we come back after this break. Nick Redfern, our guest, talking about his new book, Flying Saucers from the Kremlin. We'll be right back after this short break. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Nick Redfern. He's got two new books out, and one of them is called The Alien Book, A Guide to Extraterrestrial Beings on Earth. We'll get to that at the top of the hour. Talking about his other book, just released, Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, and Nick's website, which is nickredford40.blogspot.com. It's easy to get to. Just click on the links over at Jimmy Church Radio. Now, Nick, okay, let's flip this around a little bit on these MJ-12 documents. I just brought up, it seems to me that a state actor would have to be involved in creating these documents. I've never considered somebody just creating them for fun. Too much work and too detailed, fooled a lot of people. I've always considered their source being Kirkland Air Force Base. Right there, Doti and the crew. They were gifted at creating fake documents and distributing those. And that's where I think the source has always been. That being said, a state actor like Moscow also would have the ability to create such detailed documents, and that is an interesting take. So if we go with that for a second, do you think that Chandray and Bill Moore, if they did source out of Moscow, that they knew?
No, I actually don't. I think they were innocent parties in this who got involved purely and simply because they were, getting really close and closer and closer to the Roswell story. Because what happened was, the Roswell incident that Bill Moore co-wrote was published in 1980. And I can tell you, having written, a lot of books myself, when I have a book out, within weeks afterwards, people contact me and said, "Hey, I read the book, and I know something about this story." Mm-hmm. And I think, that's basically what happened with Moore and Berlitz, and then Moore and Chandray, and then with Stan Friedman as well. That the more you write about this and do radio shows and TV, people contact you more and more. So I think Bill Moore and Chandray and Stan were totally innocent in all this when they were fed these highly classified and highly controversial documents on dead aliens, crashed UFOs, and so on. But yeah, you're right. There's no doubt that Kirtland Air Force Base does seem to play a significant role in all of this. But I think one of the things to keep in mind, or the possibilities to keep in mind, is that it's entirely possible, that U.S. intelligence was aware of what Russian intelligence was doing. Maybe they even created their own MJ-12 documents to really complicate things. So, I think when you start looking into, these people who are really skilled at creating fake documents and fake scenarios and seeding them into this community or that community, it becomes extremely difficult to know who is actually pulling the strings, and which side is it, or are both sides trying to do it to try and complicate things even more,
You know who I feel bad for this? If they did source out of the Kremlin, you know who I feel bad for? Richard Doti. Richard Doti. Because, Doti and his ego, he probably looked at those and goes, "Oh, hold on a minute. Hold on. I didn't do these. Somebody is coming into my game here." If they did source out of the Kremlin, do you think Doti was aware of it?
Well, I don't know if, I can't say if he knew or not, but what I can say with 100% certainty is that the FBI actually was genuinely concerned that the Russians had created the MJ-12 documents. Now, the amount of documents that have surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act on this issue is a handful. It's about 40 or 50 pages, and portions of Bill Moore's FBI file have been released as well. And what we know from the FBI's investigation of the documents themselves specifically is that was one of the primary theories they had, that the Russians had created these documents solely as a means to reel in people who were working on these classified programs, and you give us something, we'll give you something. And that scenario makes common sense if you look at it from the perspective of the fact that U.S. intelligence was worried at that time that there were people in the aviation industry and the intelligence community who may have been open to the idea of doing a deal with the Russians.
The other part of this, if these did source out of the Kremlin, which I think this should be discussed, if these were sourced out of the Kremlin, what else was the Kremlin sending this way, and to whom, and does it continue to this day?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about this at all. You can go back in time and forward in time. I mean, just sort of give you a classic example from the 1960s, which revolves around the Aetherius Society. Now, the Aetherius Society was a group created in the UK, but which now has its headquarters in Los Angeles. And it's basically an organization that sort of buys into the whole space brother contactee movement. Now, in the late 50s and through the 60s, the Aetherius Society was a very influential and organization, had a lot of membership to it as well. Now, there's an organization or an intelligence arm of the British police force called Special Branch, and they get involved in terrorist investigations and counterintelligence and things like that. They opened a file on the Aetherius Society, which I got through the terms of the UK Freedom of Information Act. And the Special Branch was watching them because the Aetherius Society was very vocal on the fact that they felt that the UK needed to get rid of all its atomic weapons. And part of the reason was because the aliens had told them to get rid of them. And Special Branch was very concerned that regardless of whether or not the Aetherius Society were legitimate or not, the Special Branch was concerned that the Russians might have been using them almost in like a puppet type situation and getting the Aetherius Society to whip up more interest in the UK for getting rid of nuclear weapons because the aliens said so. And so Special Branch came again, like with the FBI in the US, came to suspect that the Aetherius Society was possibly being dictated by and used by Russian intelligence as a way to allow the English people, if you like, to decide, yes, we want the nukes gone, we don't want any part of them. And when you put all that picture together, what you see is, again, manipulation by the Russians using atomic weapons as a tool of fear and to try and find ways to encourage the British people to get rid of their nukes and do it under the banner of something like the Aetherius Society, where more and more people might think, wow, this group's talking some sense. And so, again, it was very similar to the Adamski situation and the FBI, and it also demonstrates how, it spanned the globe. It wasn't just in the US and the Russians doing it. It was Europe, the UK, and Australia as well.
I used to live, trip on this, Nick, I used to live a couple of blocks away from Aetheria. And years ago, I was a kid, right? I was in my 20s. And I'm with somebody, we're going down like Fountain, one of the streets in Hollywood. And my friend points out, hey, man, that's the UFO group right there. And he points at the house. And it was just a trippy looking place, and I never once took my eyes off of it when I drove up. I can't remember the street that it was on. It's like El Central or something, and Fountain, and would look at it and would look for people walking around outside, and you would see them from time to time. But that was a huge organization at one point. I don't know what the membership is today, but they were very influential for a long time.
Yeah, they were, and the file that I got from Special Branch in the UK runs to about 75 pages, and it shows how Special Branch would sit in the audience at some of the lectures that the Aetherius Society put on, and they put a number of anti-nuclear demonstrations on in Trafalgar Square in London, England, and again, Special Branch had its agents seated in the audience, just listening as to how the Aetherius Society was saying, let's get rid of our nukes. And again, it was sort of behind the banner of UFOs. And it's a fascinating but also weird piece of Cold War history, when you see that the Russians may have been trying to influence the British public to get rid of their nukes, but doing so using UFOs and aliens. So, the whole scenario, the whole saga of that period from the late 40s to the present day still, is a very odd and weird one. And it's kind of one of those too good to be true stories. But ironically, it actually really is true.
Well, okay, and you mentioned earlier about, people that reach out after they read the book. Has anybody, what has the reaction been to this MJ12 idea? I don't want to say theory because I think it's as concrete as anything. Has anybody reached out to you about that, saying, hey, I know something here?
Well, not exactly on the MJ12 documents, but I've got one really interesting story, which, it won't hurt to sort of mention it because it may bring other people in who know something about it. But I actually got a story from a woman who said her grandfather kind of did something the other way around, which was basically feeding data and fake documentation to the Russians as a means to try and destabilize the Russians by doing exactly the mirror image opposite of what the Russians were doing. This guy reportedly worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and his job was to fabricate documents that would have the Russians going on like running around like headless chickens, chasing down fabricated stories. And she said that she knew for sure that on at least 3 or 4 occasions he had been tasked with creating fabricated UFO documents. So, this demonstrates another aspect where it wasn't just the Russians doing it to us. We were trying to manipulate the Russians as well, which is, is perfectly understandable because this was the height of the Cold War when the Russians had nuclear missiles, pointed right at us as they do right now. So, I often get little bits of data like this, or people who want to share stories who've, read the books or heard me on a radio show. And I'm encouraged, when people do come forward because it sort of further legitimizes the stories and adds to the body of data that we've got.
Well, and the Washington was okay with UFO reports here in the United States because if it was secret aircraft or missile test or anything that was a black type project, then you could throw UFO on it, and the Russians would be sent off of the scent, if you will. Would the same thing have been going on in Russia? Right? If the reports were UFOs in Russia, then it would throw us off of the trail of the technology that they would have been working on, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, this is where things get sort of really complicated, where, which stories are real, whose versions, whose documents are real, whose material is fabricated, and, who's doing this and why are they doing it. But, one interesting aside is that as it relates to Russia and the United States is that I'm sure most of your listeners have heard of the story of Serpo and the Serpo documents, which surfaced a number of years ago. Yeah. Well, when I was doing the research, and I've got an entire section in the book on this, that one figure came forward, a guy came forward, stating that the documents were real in the sense that they were created by government agents, but he said they weren't real. And he said basically they were designed, again, to try and make the Russians think that we had some sort of like an alien liaison. We'd had close encounters with aliens, and possibly we even had alien technology. Now, this particular source said the documents were not real in the sense that they were, official documents, but they were created by people in government. And the source said that the person who wrote these documents was a woman named Alice Bradley Sheldon. Now, if you look up Alice Bradley Sheldon, you'll find some interesting information. She was actually a CIA intelligence officer in the 1950s, and she was also someone who wrote science fiction, alien-based science fiction, under the alias of a man's name, James Tiptree. And Alice Bradley Sheldon would arguably have been the perfect person to create fabricated documents aimed at the Russians because, as I said, she was a CIA intelligence officer and she wrote extraterrestrial-based sci-fi novels. So, you know, that you put those two aspects together, UFOs, a skilled author, and, you know, the CIA and fabricated documents, that, I think, is an interesting angle that needs pursuing further. I've gone about as far as I can, and that's why I put it in the book, in the hope that, you know, other people will be able to add to it who may know something about it. But again, you know, if MJ12, the documents, and the Serpo documents can have been shown to have been fabricated, that, of course, begs the question, well, how many of these so-called leaked documents have also been created by counterintelligence people, disinformation experts? You know, it makes you wonder, are all of these leaked documents, you know, not the real deal? You know, there's something designed to push us down different avenues and so on. You know, it clearly opens up, you know, a lot of questions that could place much of ufology in a way, or in an angle, if you like, very different to what was perceived in the 80s and 90s.
Not to get off of your book, but staying on Serpo, because I'm glad you brought that up. I think at one point, Nick, I had read every single word of the Serpo documents, which took me months. Okay, that was a very complex, deep, massive project. And I had always thought from the beginning that this was government, whether it was a real story, right? Whether the exchange program and the Jeeps and whatever, that part of it, but that it was too complex, too deep, too technical. And when I say complex, I don't think there's anything out there like Serpo, right? It was, and I've always felt that it was CIA. And I think today, we're pretty solid on that Serpo may have been just a complete CIA Mockingbird type of operation. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't dispute that at all. I mean, that's actually the scenario pretty much that I talk about in the book, that the Serpo documents were created by U.S. intelligence and written by Alice Bradley Sheldon, who worked for the CIA, sci-fi author, and as someone who had the time, because it was her job, you know, to put together all of these documents and then have someone like a courier hand them over to somebody in Moscow, and then Moscow thinks, oh my God, you know, the US has got their hands on highly classified and highly advanced alien technology. They've even met aliens. And I think that was probably the goal. You know, you have a bunch of people sitting around in the Kremlin panicking that, you know, the US has got alien technology and so on. But I'll tell you something that is kind of interesting and a little bit weird as well, is that the MJ12 documents, that famous batch of about 8 pages, you know, with the Truman signature on that Bill Moore, Stan Friedman, and Jamie Chandray got. Well, they were first publicly made available on in the newspapers and books and so on in May 1987. In terms of books, the first reference was in Tim Good's May 1987 book, Above Top Secret. Now, it just so happens, in just days around when the documents went public, Alice Bradley Sheldon actually shot her husband and killed him, and then shot herself and killed herself, which is kind of like a really weird timing, you know.
What do you, we've got a couple of minutes to the break. The other people that were around Serpo, like Victor Martinez, I'll just say it out loud, Bill Ryan, Doti, for example, too, as well. Do you think that they were aware, like Victor Martinez, that this was not what it seems, that this could be, a government disinformation program?
Well, they certainly knew the rumors, but the reason, I personally, though, I don't think they were in a position where they thought this was disinformation, fabricated documents. And I think one of the main reasons why so many people bought into it was because of the sheer number of pages, as you well know, put out yourself. How long it took you to read all this material. I think most people would take the view, with so much material on Serpo, there's just no way someone could take the time to fabricate it, or actually to have the time to do it, So, but somebody like Alice Bradley Sheldon would be the perfect person, because it wasn't something she'd be doing, hoaxing it in a basement, after work. Her job was, creating and crafting things like this. So, when people said, well, this can't be a hoax because there's just so much material and no one could fake all this, well, the answer is yes, somebody actually could do it. If they were working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in the CIA, concocting bogus UFO stories to worry the Soviets.
You're breaking hearts right now. I don't care.
I don't care.
in that. I mean, I'm with you.
I can only. I can only say it as I see it.
Right.
I mean, I'm someone who is a full-on believer in the UFO phenomenon. The reason I got involved and interested because my dad was a radar mechanic in the Royal Air Force in the UK, and he was actually involved in several UFO incidents. And there's no doubt in my mind that the UFO phenomenon is real, 100%. Now, whether it's extraterrestrial, multidimensional, who knows what they are, but they are interacting with us and they're real. However, that hasn't stopped intelligence agencies from manipulating what is a genuine, really mystifying phenomenon. And so that's where things get more and more controversial. You've got the real UFO phenomenon, then you've got people in the intelligence communities of the East and West fabricating stories based around what may have been real actions and activity. So, it's the story that I tell in the book is very much more sort of like a tale of espionage meets UFOs rather than a straightforward UFO book. And I don't think really, even though I say so myself, I don't really think anybody's sort of really gone deeply down that path of how and why the UFO subject has been the tool of disinformation, counterintelligence, psychological warfare. But we now have the evidence, that this phenomenon, the real phenomenon, is being used as a means to confuse the potential enemy, so to speak.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to get home and check the Serpo website to see if Victor posted an update. Right? I mean, it was like it consumed me. Yeah. It consumed me. And at one point...
Well, that was probably the point.
Yeah, well, it consumed me. And I felt that it was an authentic government source. Disinformation, real, not real. I that part didn't play into it for me, but I felt that this was real government stuff going down. I felt it in my bones. That today I can look back and say I was right. But that being said, at a recent UFO conference, I'm walking. I was with a group of people, and somebody came up behind me and whispered in my ear. Nick, I'm not making this up. Somebody whispered in my ear, Serpo is real. I have info. Right? And I turned around and looked, and this person's walking away, and I didn't care. I didn't care. I didn't care. People today are still believers in the story. They are. They can't let it go. They can't. Let's...
Well, I mean, when you said, about I'm breaking hearts, but maybe I am, but that's just the way I look at it. That's just too bad, because I think there's no point just upholding cool stories because they're cool and exciting. We have to get to the heart of what the phenomenon is and who's doing all this manipulation. And if some cases turn out to be 100% genuine, as we always thought, well, that's great. But on the other hand, if some of the central points, if you like, in ufology, like MJ12, come crashing down, well, and we prove that, this was some sort of counterintelligence program and not real documents, then, the only thing I can say, well, that is just too bad, and people are just going to have to deal with it and get on with their lives and get on with their UFO research and continue what you're doing. But don't live in the past of, I wish those documents were real, because that's sort of just such a weak, pathetic approach to take. We've got to focus on getting answers, and whatever the answers are, we should go with them. If we get the solid answers, let's go with them, even if it's not what we want to hear. And if it is what we want to hear, well, that's perfect.
Nick Redfern, bringing his A game. Nick, stay right there. We'll take our break, and when we come back, we'll talk about The Alien Book, a guide from extraterrestrial beings here on Earth. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. More with Nick Redfern after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Nick Redfern is our guest, talking about his two new books, and we're going to switch gears. The Alien Book, a guide to extraterrestrial beings here on Earth or on Earth. And Nick, check this out. I got today in the mail, sent to me from David Icke, his new book, right? It's called The Trigger. It's about 9/11. Have you seen it yet?
No, I haven't even heard of that book, no.
It just got released, but are you ready? 900 pages.
Whoa!
And very, very, very small type. And I'm so intimidated by it. I got to read it, but 900, it's like bigger than the King James Bible, man. It weighs like 5 pounds. I don't know how he does it. I seriously don't know how you write a 900-page book. This is his.
Yeah, that's a lot of pages. That's a lot of trees.
That's a lot of trees, man. And this is his second 900-page book this year, man. It's just, This is crazy. Okay. I just wanted to freak you out. You know what it's like. You know what it's like to write a book. It's a lot of work and a lot of research. And to crank out 900 pages. How'd you like to be the editor on this, Oh, man.
I wouldn't.
Right.
That's the answer. I wouldn't.
900 pages. All right. Now, why hasn't somebody written a guide to extraterrestrial beings yet? Why hasn't this book been done?
I don't know, but what I would say is, I think it's important as an author that you want to be able to give the reader something new each time, and altogether so far I've done, I think it's 54 or 55 books. It's around about that point anyway. Even I've kind of lost a little bit of how many it actually is. But anyway, but I always think it's important to be able to give the reader something new, whether it's a new slant on an old case or, something that's just a totally new period, So I spend a lot of time usually trying to figure out what should I do for the next book. You don't just want to go over old ground, which is why I did the Flying Saucers from the Kremlin book, because it hadn't really been done before. And but the other one you're talking about, the Alien book, it's just coincidental that the two books have come out together, because one's come out, the Alien book's come out from Visible Ink Press, and the Kremlin book has come out from Lisa Hagen Books. Lisa's my agent, and the the company, Visible Ink Press, that did the Alien book, all their books are basically the same. They're like 400 pages, which is about my limit. About 400 pages long, about 120 photographs, and they're typically done in like an A to Z style. So you can dive in to various portions of the book without having to, think, oh my God, I've got to wade through 400 pages from 1 to 400. You don't have to do it. You can look at a chapter or a section on the black-eyed children or the reptilians and just, go through it as you like. And so I spoke to the publishers when they said, have you got any new ideas, Nick? And I said, well, what about a book that kind of looks at all the different types of aliens that people have reported between 1947 and right now? And they like the idea of, not just the Greys or not just the Space Brothers or not just the reptilians, but some really weird and obscure cases as well. So that's basically the way the book came together. But it was just coincidence that the two books with two different publishers decided to put them out pretty much at the same time as each other. But, there was no kind of infighting. It was just like, oh, okay, well, both the books are different, so neither publisher really cared that much. So. How did you
compile the research? Because you just stated the obvious, right? We have Greys and Nordics and Mantis Beings and reptilians. There's subgroups for each one of those too as well. But then there's everything else. How did you base your research? By country? By time?
It was. I guess time had played into it a lot. I think more than anything else, I like to sort of take what I consider like a journalistic approach to what I do. So you sort of seek out stories and witnesses and government documents, and if there are cases from the past, where somebody had a really strange encounter with a bizarre creature, well, you try and find the person who it was, and if they're no longer around but their grandchildren are, I do the proactive approach. I track them down and phone them up, and say, hey, my name's Nick Redfern, etc. Writing a book on this. Would you be interested in sharing your grandfather's encounter back in 1921 or whatever? I don't sort of I'm not one of these people who shies away from taking a proactive approach. I'll knock on doors and use the Freedom Information Act and, track down people who might have some knowledge. And in the same way, if you're a journalist living in a little town and you're investigating a local murder, you put all the pieces together and track down anyone who knows about it. And that's what I do. I take that approach to compiling each chapter in the book.
How many, I want two numbers from you. The first one is, how many different types of beings did you think you were going to write about? And then ultimately, how many made it in the book?
Well, but that's a good point, because initially I thought it probably would be round about 20, 25, because admittedly most people do think about the Space Brothers, the Greys, the Reptilians, and then a few kind of offshoots. But when the book was completed, there's actually close to 50 different chapters in the book on different types of alien creatures that have been seen over the years. And it sort of crosses everything from those three, obviously the most well-known types of entities that have been seen. But then again, you've got some creatures that just popped up once, like the famous story of the Flatwoods Monster in West Virginia.
Right.
With this, yeah. I mean, that's like I included that in the book, not just because it was a fascinating story, but also because it was like a one-off thing. Nothing like the Flatwoods Monster was ever seen again. And then you've got more modern-day stuff like the black-eyed children, which I've got a lengthy chapter on the black-eyed children. These sort of pale-faced, black-eyed, hybrid human alien creatures, however you want to term them. And also got some sort of ancient astronaut stories, like, for example, if you look back into the distant past, like Quetzalcoatl, that has been perceived by ancient astronaut researchers as some sort of extraterrestrial. So, I really try and split it up, and also, creatures like the Chupacabra, and also cases where Bigfoot creatures have been seen at the same time and location as UFOs, suggesting a potential UFO link to Bigfoot. So there's like a lot of variation in terms of the potential creatures or aliens that I've looked into.
What was the one, for even Nick Redfern, where you went, okay, now this is interesting?
Yeah.
What's the one that stood out that you didn't know of before? Yeah, that you didn't know of before.
Well, one of the sort of the more disturbing ones, but sort of, I guess to a degree sensationalized as well, is the issue of people who've died allegedly at the hands of extraterrestrials. There's some really weird and sinister stories that I include in the book. One in relation to the Bigfoot stories, where there have been sightings of Bigfoot and UFOs, and people have gone missing, and there have been stories of bodies being found sort of torn to pieces, by these creatures, and also where people, for example, pilots, have encountered UFOs and gone missing. A famous one from 1953, the Kinross case, where a military pilot was pursuing a UFO over Michigan, Lake Michigan, and the plane vanished and the UFO vanished. So that's one of the more, I guess, sort of like completely out of the, the chart, so to speak, when you're talking about aliens that may actually be using us as a food source, So it gets into some controversial areas that go, far beyond just talking about, well, this alien looks like this or this alien looks like that,
And there's been a lot of talk lately. Certainly the film was just released about this too, Extraordinary the Seeding, about hybrids and hybrid children that may be here. They may also, been taken off planet and live somewhere else. But that the seeding program is worldwide. There are potentially millions of people that are involved in this, in which case it could be aliens among us, daily, and we don't even know about it.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, because I actually do. I've got several chapters within the book which deal with aliens that must, potentially at least, may be able to maneuver among us purely and simply because they look so much just like us. Certainly, you can go back to the early 50s with Adamski and Van Tassel and people like that. All of those people then, reported the aliens as looking extremely, eerily, similar to us. And the only differences were that they had sort of, really long hair, which the guys didn't have, back in the late 40s and 50s. Nobody, apart from women, had long hair then. So they did stand out. And the other aspect being that they were very often extremely tall, like 6'8", 6'9". But I would say for sure that in the modern era, at least, the entities that are sort of perceived as, human alien hybrids would be the black-eyed children. And, typically they're described as knocking on people's doors late at night and trying to find a way to be invited into the house, which very much parallels the old legends of how vampires had to be invited into the home before they could cross the threshold, so to speak. And most people describe the black-eyed children as wearing black hoodies with the hood pulled right down as far as it can go, so people don't actually get to see their faces very well. But the skin is described as being very pale an almost plastic light, and as well as that, they kind of have this hypnotic ability where people have said that they got a really weird and creepy vibe from the black-eyed children, and they knew they shouldn't open the door, but they could see their hand going towards the door as if something was actually controlling their mind and forcing them to open the door. Now, of the very few people who have said the black-eyed children have actually managed to get inside the home, just about all of them have said that within quite literally seconds of being in the presence of the black-eyed children, they started to feel weak and tired, kind of like, as one explained it, kind of like if a diabetic was crashing, they'd miss breakfast, miss lunch, and then it was like 11 o'clock at night and they've got a major case of the shakes and they feel really ill and sweaty and cold. That's how people have described it when the black-eyed children get in the house. It's like they're like a supernatural parasite, and their goal may literally be to sort of drain us of our life force. In that sense, they would be like an extraterrestrial vampire almost, if you like, and that's one of the angles that I talk about in one of the specific chapters in the book.
With Van Tassel, you brought this up a few times tonight, and Van Tassel is somebody that I've reached. I've taken it about as far as I can go, right, with George Van Tassel. Yeah. But him and Adamski talking about their contact with the Venusians, the research that we had on Venus back in the 50s was very incomplete. Then we found out more about Venus and certainly sent probes out to Venus and found out that, the temperature and what Venus actually was changed our views about the possibility of life being there. Then 2 days ago, I don't know if you read this, but I'll just let you know. You can check it out. This report in the journal Science was just released that Venus was moderate temperatures until 700 million years ago and had all of the water and everything that was needed and oxygen for 3 billion years. Only until recently has the temperatures risen there and, turned it into the hellhole that it is today. But it makes you wonder now about Van Tassel and what others were talking about. I after reading that report, Nick, I just thought maybe they're underground. Maybe there was something really to what George Van Tassel had to say. Did you get a chance to read that report or see it in the news?
I actually haven't seen that report, but I will. But there's several things you said actually stand out. You point out, the fact that in the distant past, Venus may have been, hospitable and, had a good climate and oxygen. That's actually not too dissimilar for what we know from NASA's probes that have been sent to Mars, where it's very clear that, in the distant past that Mars had abundant amounts of water, and we're not talking about just at the polar ice caps in the form of ice, but, sort of massive lakes and possibly, it's been theorized, oceans on Mars. Now, a friend of mine, the late Mac Tonis, he died young at 34 of heart disease, but before he died, Mac wrote a book called The Crypto-terrestrials, which looked at the idea of an ancient race, which could either have been an ancient human race or an ancient extraterrestrial race, that perhaps came to the Earth and actually decided that the best way to live on our planet and to avoid this warlike race called the human race would be to live underground. And although his book was written in a very sort of hypothetical way, he did sort of address those actual points, the idea of, say, a faraway world that was destroyed or that was on the brink of destruction, and they sort of migrated to the Earth and decided to keep away from us and could have been responsible, for today's UFO encounters, but possibly the idea that, they've never gone home to their home planet, but may well sort of be hidden parties on our own world.
I've said this many times. There are two people. There's many, but there are two that stand out that I will never get a chance to interview and didn't. One being Lloyd Pye, and the other one Mac Tonys. And he died at 34. What was he like?
Well, Mac was a good guy. He died, unfortunately, of heart disease. It's just one of those things that unfortunately happens, that sometimes a young person gets heart disease, and that's what happened with Mac. But his two books, he wrote two non-fiction books, both of which kind of melted into each other. One was called After the Martian Apocalypse, and the other one was his book, The Crypto-terrestrials. Now, After the Martian Apocalypse was a very good, solid, and largely free of speculation in relation to things like the face on Mars and, these pyramid structures that people talk about. And the Crypto-terrestrials looked at this idea of either an ancient human or an ancient extraterrestrial civilization possibly being forced to go from their world to here, and, as I said, sort of burrowing, thousands of feet under the earth and living there, and just now and again surfacing. But Mac was someone, he's sort of often portrayed as like a very intense sort of type character, but he wasn't. He was just someone who was very driven by what he liked to do, but also, he had a very good sense of humor and, and good social life, and in other words, he was someone, I should say, who was very driven and in terms of fact-based data. He wasn't someone who speculated a great deal. He was just the facts, please, that kind of thing.
Where can everybody, I want to thank you, Nick. What a great conversation tonight. Just amazing. Where can everybody go and find all of your books?
Well, all of my books are available on Amazon. I think about 40% of them you can get off the shelves in Barnes & Noble. If you want to contact me, Nick Redfern UFO is my Twitter account. I have a blog, World of Whatever. You can reach me there. And Facebook as well. There's a bunch of Nick Redferns, but scroll down and you'll see me. So.
Thank you so much. Are you speaking anywhere? What are you doing?
Yeah, actually, roughly this time next month, I'll be at the Texas Bigfoot Conference in Jefferson, Texas, and then the following week, also in Texas, I'll be at the Goatman Festival, which are my other big interest, cryptozoology, and then in early November, I'll be speaking at the Conference of the Unexplained in Pennsylvania.
Thank you so much, Nick. Enjoy the rest of your night.
You too, Jimmy. Thanks a lot.
Nick Redfern, and Nick's links are right there at jimmychurchradio.com. You can go and click Nick Redfern 40and.blogspot.com right there at Jimmy Church Radio, and everything you need is right there. I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll be back, and I'm going to open up the phone lines. Let's go open lines for the next half hour like we always do. 747-228-2051. I'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Thank you, Nick Redfern. Wow. Oh, great conversation. Both books are amazing, and you can just head over to Nick's site and pick them up. They're both amazing. He mentioned, oh, by the way, phone lines are open, 747-228-2051. We'll go open lines for this last segment. He mentioned 55 books, and I've got like a Nick Redfern shelf. That's all I can say. And I just enjoy reading them all. 747 228-2051. Open lines right now. Let's go straight to the phones. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Who's calling?
This is Nathan in Ohio.
Hey, Nathan in Ohio. How are you?
I'm good. First thing, I have a request as a fan of the show that you do some Q&As with some people soon.
Q&As. Isn't that what I do every night, Nathan?
Well, I mean, I guess, but I like being able to call and ask a question.
Oh, I see. You want to be able to call in and speak to the guest. Yeah, we can do that. I mean, yeah, sure. Anybody specific that you have in mind?
Well, the thought that I had about it was this. See, I was one of the last people to. I was on the show that was Jim Mars's last show.
Uh-huh.
And that's what kind of inspired this thought in my mind the other day. And it's not about a specific person, but you might focus on people that, really have vast knowledge on, maybe pick a specific subject each night.
Mm-hmm.
And do one that pick somebody that knows that subject well enough to answer the questions,
Yeah,
like,
and there isn't any reason why I don't go to open lines. One thing that I have found, and this is just me, that when I have 2 hours with a guest each night, I don't have time to go to open lines because we're always knee deep in it. Like tonight with Nick, right? There was just so much stuff to cover, and going to open lines would take away from my time with him. And I know that's being a little bit selfish in some regards, but it's just that I always run out of time. And when I have, and this is another way to look at it, some guests are from the West Coast. Most are not, right? They're on a different time zone. So if I have somebody from New York or from Chicago or from Florida or whatever, like Nick is in Texas, he's 2 hours ahead. So right now for Nick, it's 11:30 at night. Right, and I have to respect that part of it too, and that's it. I don't have a specific reason other than it's a time thing. But bringing on somebody specifically to do a Q&A, like an AMA type Q&A, and just do a broadcast like that, I think that's a great idea. That's why I was asking you. Did you have somebody specific, like for Nick tonight? Right, for Nick tonight, what would you have asked him?
Well, honestly, I would ask about if he noticed anything about individuality within different types of aliens. I know that came up towards the end of the show, but I know he hears reports beyond probably even your average ufologist, just because he's been around for a long time. He covers a lot of different high strangeness. So people are probably kind of like Linda. People are comfortable to go to Linda about things.
Right. I wanted to ask you. And when you see the book and the way that it's written, it's very interesting. And he hit with a number of around 50. Right, 50 different types of ETs visiting Earth. I would put the number in the thousands. Right now, that would be a nearly impossible book to write. Be very be like David Icke. You would have one page per alien and come up with a 900-page book. How many different types of different ETs do you think are visiting Earth? How many have you seen?
Well, I come from the perspective of somebody who's been an abductee, or feels they've been an abductee their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would identify that way. So I've seen about 15, but in that group of 15, they're all individual species, and I don't see a lot of individuality within their culture that I've noticed. So it's like, are they interested in, maybe we're even, I think we're here to experience individuality.
That's interesting. If we flip this around a little bit, and let's say that you and I and 20 other people, right, our friends or buddies, it doesn't matter, 20, we go to Zeta Reticuli, right? You know, we go to Serpo, for instance, and we land and we get off the ship. Now, we know the individuality that is here on Earth, but we also know everybody is human. But we've got every color, every height, every weight, right? And would they perceive us not as being Earthlings, right? That not being Homo sapien sapien, that they would think at first glance that quite possibly that we were from different planets. Do you think that?
Well, possibly.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Well, I just know that they've been interested in us for a very long time. And it's not just to study us, or they'd be gone by now. So they think we're important for some reason.
Well, last night with Whitley said last night, I don't know if you caught the show, but he said one thing
I did.
You did? Okay. He said they were interested in our souls, not necessarily the planet. Do you agree with him?
I do. Whitley's one of my favorite. I'm a regular Dreamlander. Whitley's one of my favorite people.
That was a great conversation last night with Whitley. I've had many with him.
He has a perspective not everybody gets to share, but I think a lot of people agree with him that aren't necessarily in the position to speak it.
Well, and so staying on this, I want to know what you've seen. When you say you don't see individuality in the same species, what are you saying? That they're identical? Are they almost like clones of each other?
It does seem that way. Even the Nordics, which appear to be the most human to me, like they're almost too. I mean, they're like looking at data. They're like, that's how pale they are. But they're Nordic, but they have blonde hair. And it's like they're obviously not human. But it's not that they're unattractive. It's just that they all appear the same because they have genetically altered themselves to the point where they all look the same anyway. Everything kind of seems to serve its purpose out there. And we kind of get to choose our own purpose here.
And the individuality part of it, when it comes to, the Mantis Beings specifically and these reptilian races, I don't know if I had seen a snake, right? A snake. And a couple of weeks later, I see the same species of snake. But I wouldn't be able to tell if it was two different snakes or if it was the same one. Do we have the same issues with the Mantis Beings, right? I wouldn't.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I would be able to tell the difference.
Well, first of all, I can speak if it wasn't for the fact that they're controlling your mind, because when I step away from them, because in the moment you're not terrified by them because they're kind of controlling your mind. But once you're away from the situation and you're trying to process having been in a situation where there was a 7-foot-tall mantis being, it does become hard to tell, one from another one. But they don't seem like they're anymore. They may have managerial status, but I don't think they're in charge of anything. They seem to answer to some higher cause to them, even.
Interesting. And I have heard many times, if I came face to face with a mantis being, I think I would be terrified. And I have heard so many times that it was the mantis beings that were the kindest, right? They were the gentlest. They were the nicest and the most intelligent. Do you get the same impressions?
I think everything, there's a real strong chance that a lot of these things have to adapt to our individuality. It's like, that's why there's like a whole group of beings involved in abducting one person. You know what I mean? Human beings are so unpredictable. So a lot of it is that. I mean, it's like Whitley was saying, these things are so different from us that it's not like it's the opposite of the relationship you have with your dog. See, I know a mantis being can stare into your eyes and make you feel whatever emotion it wants you to feel. It's like, I call it the love stare.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they'll flood you with this emotion of light and love, and you can even feel like you're in love with that being to some degree because of what they're suggesting into your mind. But then when you're away from it, you realize they're doing the same types of manipulation that any other being is doing.
Are you speaking from experience?
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to get into this with Nick tonight, and I meant to, by the way. It got away from me. But the little blue guys that Whitley has written about and spoken about for years, we were talking about them last night. Have you encountered them?
I have. I encountered them from the point of my early childhood I'm 35 now. I haven't seen anything that was alien since about 2011 when me and my wife split up. I don't know why around that time it ended, but it seemed to end around that time and kind of change direction and become more like dream-oriented and astral. But I definitely had a lot of physical experiences starting from an early age.
Were the blue beings as Whitley has described them? I haven't encountered them, so I really don't have.
Well, I've read Communion, and I've seen the Communion movie, and they tried to depict him in the movie, but they're not perfect. I think the ghost description is pretty close. For whatever reason, I see them in twos. He said threes, but I've always seen them in pairs. And I've always thought they were possibly the same beings every time with them.
Did you know that Rita and I tried to watch Communion a couple of weeks ago? Can't find it. It doesn't stream. And it's not available for purchase to view either, to rent or to purchase online.
That's crazy. I mean, it's not the best. I don't know how it holds up, but it is kind of a good litmus test for yourself, I think.
That movie scared the crap out of me. The book scared me too as well. It scared me in that it felt to me that these were real experiences that were documented in the book, and that's that, right? That the book is absolutely nonfiction. It's a historical record. That's why it scared me. The way that Christopher Walken is so scared in the movie, and with these little guys running around, and the way that they were depicted, that scared the crap out of me. It really did. It terrified me.
Yeah, especially the scene when he gets on the bus and you see all the Mantis Beings on the bus.
Yes. I forgot about that.
It's images like that really bring memories back to me, and that was a big part of me coming to terms with a lot of this stuff.
Now, I wanted to get back to the little blue guys. Did you have interaction with them? Did you speak with them?
It's like they would appear anytime something else wanted to abduct me, and it was like, in order to abduct me, they had to interact with them in some way. And they always had this wand. I call it a wand. It looked almost like a little toy, but it was just this thing they held in their hand, and they would touch me with it, and I would feel like an electrical current run through my body, and then whatever beings then my abduction experience would happen from that point forward.
So they were first.
Almost always, yes. And sometimes it would just be them, but every time something else was there, they were always there.
Now, Whitley, and you've been a Dreamlander, so you've been following Whitley for a while. And I talked to him about this briefly last night. He then said that he understood that they were us, but almost like from representing death, I guess, is the best way that I could put it. I definitely believe there's some type of, almost like a psychopomp. They have more to do with us here on Earth, right,
than they specifically have to do with something in outer space. But something from outer space comes, it has to have their permission to enter into. I mean, they're like, I wouldn't call. I've even thought of them as maybe possibly being Jinn or something like that.
Right, blue. Right?
Yeah.
That's the other part. That's the other part about this. Now, the reason why I was so freaked out about that is because history over and over again has made reference to, things like these little blue guys. And it doesn't matter what culture, what part of the world. You just brought up the Jinn. We could talk about leprechauns, for that matter, or fairies.
Yeah, kobolds is what they originally Whitley started calling them at first.
Yes, that's right. And so, when we die, are they from the world that we ascend to or cross over to? And I remember, this is many years, man, this is a long time ago. And I remember Whitley, this is probably late 90s, somewhere in there. And I'm listening to Whitley talk about this. And in the dark, of all things, right? I'm listening to this. Yeah. And it made sense. It just made sense that this was an interdimensional, from another parallel world coming into ours, interfacing with us, and they were us. This is on our planet. This isn't off planet. This is just what exists in another dimension that we don't see, that they cross over to, and then we are able to interact with them. And it was like a terrifying, but what's the word? Eye-opening, mind-expanding, too, as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Whitley's just perfect for that all the time.
Well, and so that's my question to you. Did they tell you that that's who they were?
I don't get a lot of answers from things, but a lot of the times I react with fear, whereas Whitley, even though he's terrified, he enters into it in a way where he's just letting it be an experience. I kind of take a negative stance with a lot of it, but it's just because it was forced upon me.
And I understand that, and you and I have talked about this before. Man, you're almost like a guest right now, and I just don't want this conversation to end. But the negative aspect of it, you were never harmed, were you?
Not to a degree where I could prove it, no, but psychologically maybe, but not in any kind of physical way.
Right. So the fear that I'm talking about when I say that, I was scared, and the references scared me. Now, Whitley certainly had physical things go down with him, and he has a reason to say that this is terrifying and it's not cool. I get that part of it. Right. But I've never been physically harmed.
The roughest abduction I ever had was people pretending to be aliens that were abducting me.
Like a
Mylar, I guess.
And they were pretending? How did you know that they were pretending?
Well, because they had, special gear on. I could tell they were human because of the way they were moving.
How old were you?
That was my last abduction. That was in 2013, about Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving of 2013. When did you first call into the show?
Right around in that time. I've called for quite a few years now.
Yeah, right. And you said that the reason why I'm asking when it was and how old were you, because you would know human movement. You would understand that that's what you were looking at, that it would be somebody in costume, right? We know it when we see it on TV, right? We know when somebody is dressed up and it's not real. And that's the vibe that you got? Well, who would have done it? I mean, was it the government, do you think?
The thing was, this happened right at, could be Richard Dolan's Breakaway Civilization, could be just the government. But I don't know. I just know it happens.
Where did they take you to?
Well, it was really crazy. It was like I was in my room in one sense, and almost like it was superimposed over my reality with another room, like I was in another room that I couldn't quite make out. But they were right on top of me, and there were 4 of them, and they were looking down on me. I was on a table, and they rolled me over. I could hear Twist and Shout playing in the background, which was important to me because I'm a big Beatles fan. And they rolled me over and they showed me a stereo that was a stereo that I'd had when I was young. And down to a paint spot, like a little boom box that had even a white paint splotch for where we were using it once when we painted the house, stuff like that. But I could tell they were human by the way they were moving, and I could tell there was this huge weight in the room, and everything just seemed like 2 realities superimposed over each other. But they rolled me over on my side, and I could feel them doing it.
And this was physical.
This was physical, yes.
And when you say, I've only got 2 minutes left, and I do have to sign off of the network. So before we get there, were they wearing masks, like E.T. mask and makeup?
No, what they were wearing were almost like scuba gear, except that they had this headgear around their eyes that made light. So it was like bright light shining down at me, coming from both their eye sockets. and everything else was blacked off. But they look like some kind of clandestine military unit to me.
Very interesting, Nathan. But you weren't harmed.
No, just terrified.
Yeah, of course you were terrified. I'm terrified sitting here listening to you tell us about it. It's a horrible experience that nobody should ever go through. Wow. Well, Nathan, thank you for and everybody that was on hold. I'm sure they're going to understand why they were left on hold. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to cut this conversation short. So thank you for that, and we'll see you. Just be safe out there, and we'll see you tomorrow night with Richard Dolan.
All right, thank you, and thanks for all the time.
Right on, Nathan. Behave now, okay?
All right.
I'll talk to you. And he, listening to Nathan right there, he brought up so many interesting points, and when we're talking about different species, for me, although I've heard so many different eyewitness accounts about the descriptions of them, how would we be able to tell them apart? Would they be able to tell? It's a weird situation, but until you are there and experiencing it yourself, like Nathan has, I don't have a barometer. I don't have a way to think about it. I really don't, because I can't tell things apart. I can tell my dogs apart, but that's different, right? They're different colors. And but when we're dealing with identical situations, I think that there is probably a cloning biohybrid android situation that you would have to have when you're out there traveling the universe and between star systems. That's my take, because that would be an easy solution for us to turn around and do the same thing. And that is, of course, basing everything on, long journeys, of space travel, if they're not doing it in minutes or seconds. But there you go. All right. What a great show tonight. I do want to thank Nick Redfern for coming in. His links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. The 2 new books, The Alien Book, A Guide to Extraterrestrial Beings on Earth, and Flying Saucers from the Kremlin. You can go to Nick Redfern 40 at .blogspot.com. The links are at jimmychurchradio.com. Tomorrow night, right here, Richard Bleepin' Dolan on Fade to Black. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Camarion. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and syndication is KGRA, The Planet. This broadcast owned and copyrighted 2019 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tomorrow night, Richard Dolan. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Until tomorrow night, I want everybody to be safe. Go back, Lee Tappy.